All right, I'm excited about this. We have, I think, a good group up here, especially everybody to the left and right from me. I only need to ask questions. Maybe we can sneak in some Q&A at the end if you think strongly about a certain subject and want to ask the panel something. I will kick things off with an easy question. So we talked a lot about all the breaches that are happening. Lisa talked a little bit about that. We talked about all the regulation. We're moving to the cloud. What do you think is the reason that we suddenly see this increased number of data breaches? Is it there's just more data available and so you have more breaches? Are we doing something wrong? Are the tools bad? Is something broken? What do you think is the problem?
Yeah, I'm happy to start us going. I think we're all aware that data velocity is increasing. There's different sources, multiple sources where we're collecting data. The age of wearables, the age of IoTs, virtual reality, chatbots. So sensitivity and data privacy kind of comes faster, quicker, and from multiple angles. Mm-hmm. So that's one aspect of it, but not the only aspect. There's increased scrutiny from regulators. There's increased awareness and demand from customer. I think earlier on in a session you talked about is data privacy a right and is debatable. So yeah, all these components come together.
Prior to coming to Databricks, I was actually with Microsoft for 23 years as the chief data officer. So face this internally a lot on how do you think about beyond the technology platform, how do you make sure you're thinking about people and process? And I think people represent a huge risk when you think about security around your data assets and how are you making sure, and it's particularly super interesting seeing this decentralized mesh implementation with the control with all your data product owners. How do you make sure they're also thinking about readiness and capabilities of the people and the users across the data ecosystems? Mm-hmm.
I can go next on this. For me, it's like 3 reasons. The first one is the monetary gain. Mm-hmm. Data breaches are becoming more and more expensive. And if you go and check in the market now on dark web, the price of a health data record is more than a stolen credit card. So the monetary gain from the bad guys it's more than the total value of the whole cybersecurity industry combined. That's one. The second one is the political gain. Now the attacks are state-sponsored. Mm-hmm. Against the states or a state launching different attacks. Like, for example, in 2016, 50 million records from the Turkish government just stolen, just like that, including the head of the state, right? And the other one, actually, the regulations. I have problems with regulations, right? I'm not against them, but I think they are reactive and they are limited in scope. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the famous one is GDPR, all the focus on PII. Customers, they have more sensitive information and they are really high value. So I see a lot of efforts, like they put all the guns there in like limited set of the PII and they leave the door open for the rest of high value data from the back end. Steve?
And just to follow on really, I think we've gone from a period where organizations just didn't have enough data. But today, everybody's recognized the value of data and the opportunity that presents organizations. And everybody wants to exploit AI, advanced analytics, and all those cool, sexy things. But with that comes great responsibility. Yeah. And I'm not entirely sure that all organizations culturally want to get hold of all of that opportunity, but are aware of exactly what they need to do to treat that data sensitively, particularly when they don't know where it all is. And I think that's one of the biggest issues. There's still, in some companies that I deal with, it's quite chaotic as to what's out there. They just don't know what it is, who owns it, and they're not governing in that data. So I think it's a combination of things.
Yeah, I think like what you mentioned is really, really a good point, right? If there's more and more valuable data available, then you can also make a lot of money if you're a bad actor. It's probably not going to change, right? The data is getting more and more valuable. There will be more and more data. So I feel like it's only getting worse. You can make even more money, right? So how are we supposed to react? You mentioned it's not about technology per se. It's the people, it's the culture, which I totally agree. So what do we need to do better? How do we change the culture? How do we make sure that we're not overly relying on technology? What do we need to do better?
Yeah, I think if I had a silver bullet for culture problems, I would be very, very wealthy and not on this stage. I would say it's a journey, right? Like you really have to think about change management and change process. I think making sure that you're clear in implementing those. I was very fortunate to work at a company like Microsoft where I had a new CEO come in and sort of say, we will be data-driven compared to the days of Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. That was very, very different for us as an organization. And so to sort of drive that from the top down, we had then the organizational support to say, okay, our CEO has said, which is great, now how do we actually implement that? How do we take people along on that journey? And it was a, sorry, now I'm gonna start popping or dropping. So it was definitely a journey as we went through that change management control. How do you bring the organization along? We really focused on things, education of the users. How do we do that? How do we tie processes? So things like sales bonuses, things like compensation, all of that became tied into data for us, so that we were incentivizing with carrots and sticks on, driving quality data into the ecosystem, and how do we take the organization along on that, and making sure that we were really clear on what the roadmap was to get there. How do we, have a multifaceted communication plan to make sure that we were communicating the goals and the outcomes and the benefit to the organization, to customers, to the employees themselves as we thought about quality data across the ecosystem, and the security, right, of maintaining that. So let's get rid of all those access databases that we all had under our desk with all that customer data on it, and how do we really use this, the one source of truth across the data ecosystem.
There's an obvious emotional component to this transformative change, and how people react when you go and you kind of say, now we need more transparency. You might lose direct control over this piece of UC that you've kind of managed and governed, and it's interesting how organizations take emotions into account and drive change around that aspect.
Yeah. Do you think it's getting better, or are we, when you talk to your customers, companies out there in the industry, do you feel we're getting better when it comes to security and dealing with those breaches, or are we?
I think there's more awareness, which is good, but it does require executive sponsorship. So it depends organization by organization as to how educated they are, as to not just the benefits to be data-driven, but some of those risks that come with it. Sadly, technology doesn't fix the problem exclusively, but it helps. But there is an education and cultural aspect to it all. So I think it will get better with increased education and awareness.
Yeah, you're the optimist up here.
I am the optimist.
Okay, give it to me, I'll make it really horrible now.
You're screwed.
Look, technology, we don't have a problem with technology, right? So we have, for example, the focus here is the data. We have you, for example, you're providing a very good look and feel interface to control access to the data, to actually give a visible look and feel touch to what's going on with the data landscape of a specific customer. And on top of this, I came from 25 years of work in security. I built security operation centers, and most of the time technology was a problem. The data silos we're talking about in the normal data landscape is the same in security. Firewall team, they have their own data set. EDR team, they have their own data set. They don't connect and correlate those together. Technology fixes this today. It's no longer that expensive to bring all this data in and start correlating that. My main issue, I will echo everyone here, the main issue is a process. Right? You have the technology, you don't know what to do with it. And then you need to build those processes and make them mature so you can repeat them. Let's say you have a data breach. Today, to detect a breach in data is 200 days plus.
Yeah.
200 days, that's plenty of time for a bad attacker to actually do whatever they want with their data. And then to stop this attack, it's 280 days. If you bring this visibility, you bring everything there, you can actually shorten that time period by good amount. Now, you need to build the processes to learn from the breaches, and next time automate those processes. You don't need a human factor all the time. And this is where I go to the third point, which is the people. Cybersecurity industry running short in skills. There are like today, there's like 3 million job opening for cybersecurity, and you cannot just find people to do that. And even what makes it harder, keeping cybersecurity people in the company is even harder than hiring them. Because, you know, I work for a company for a year, I double my salary next year. I just leave, right? So we need to make sure we can scale the cybersecurity landscape across all the digital assets independently than the human factor. And this is where automation, orchestration could help with that.
It's interesting, a different perspective from the data world and the data space. It's, there are skills, individuals. I think we don't spend sufficient time in architecting what are we trying to achieve. So we have remit, you might have buy-in, you might have sponsorship, you want to do the right things. Everybody is committed, but then you are actually running ahead with, well, already we have a technology solution before we even thought about, well, let's architect our data models, our data products. Let's really understand criticality, sensitivity. Let's create these centralized assets and understanding around data. And then let's make sure that we treat it in the right way. We have bespoke kind of response actions. So I find that in my world, not sufficient time is spent in actually that design phase. It's like, yes, this is the intent. We might have a number of technology platform and solutions, and we all want speed and agility. But actually, how are we going to get there? What's the most sensible way, the most integrated way across people, process, technology, and risk and compliance? All these worlds need to fit together in this ecosystem. And they are kind of siloed and disparate with their own agenda, with their own operations, day-to-day operations. And time to do things properly seems to be the major constraint that I observe.
Yeah, you both mentioned silos, right, within the security organization, but then also between the teams. Do you see those silos being broken down? I remember I come not from the data space. I spent a lot of time in application development, and the whole shift left mindset came. And so what that meant is that you involve the security professionals when you start building an application, right? When you start architecting, you try to meet as early as possible versus security being an afterthought. Do you think that's like a problem with data? Do you feel it's changing? What's your perspective on that?
I think it's bigger than data, and I think it's around strategic leadership. When you are incentivized about driving strategic outcomes for your organization sooner, faster, get me there quicker, target more customer, drive more sales, I think that puts pressure and kind of creates a, I'm not going to worry about the bigger picture. I have these things to fight today. So it takes actually strategic leadership and playing in the long-term game for an organization and thinking, where would I want to be in 50 years' time, not in the next 2 years or 3 years. And that requires a significant shift across the exec table. So it's not, I don't think it's a data problem. I think it's a behavioral problem.
It's quite interesting. One of our customers, the Very Group, the retailer, when we first started talking to them, I looked on their website, and they've got a nice video by the CEO and the CFO talking about their business, their new distribution center. And I was quite surprised that when the CEO said, one of our strategic assets is the behavioral data of our 4.5 million customers. The CEO. It wasn't just data, but behavioral data. So when you've got that level of support, you know you can get a commitment to the people and technology required to exploit that data, but also to protect it.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a number of CDOs in the room with us today. And a lot of them could tell you about the pressure of drive value as well as the pressure of enabling, putting those foundational capabilities at the same time. And yet the business users, the IT SMEs, the risk and compliance SMEs that are required across both worlds, driving use cases, business value, as well as maybe setting up the rules, the behavioral rules are the same. So it's, in a way, data not necessarily becoming a bottleneck, but the organizational agility, the level of talent and expertise within the business required to contribute to successfully partner seems to continue to be a constraint.
Yeah. I want to come back to something you said. You talked about sensitive data, and that many companies don't even know what they have. What's going on there? Is that because of the migration to the cloud, and there's a lot of sensitive data sitting in on-premise systems? Did they not classify?
I think that, firstly, a lot of organizations don't know what they've got. To start with. I come from a catalog company, and that's obviously one of the first things we do is try and help organizations understand what they have and then to classify it. Then you can start thinking about the policies that you want to apply to that information. But just this chaotic landscape of data, understanding what it is, what you have, putting it into an inventory is the first start. And assigning some ownership and governance then can begin. So for many organizations, governance is still not part of their nature, and the challenge is quite big for them. It's where do they start? Where do they prioritize? And so many organizations are investing in catalogs for the first time to address that issue, to have an enterprise-wide view of the asset that they've got spread all over the organization in different silos. But it's a big undertaking.
Yeah, do you, Robin, Seth, do you see that as well? Because I guess you are the destination. Companies are moving a lot of data into your systems. Do they classify when they do that? Do they rethink how they do it? What's your view on that problem?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organizational maturity. I mean, there are definitely some organizations that say, we will do nothing until we move all of our data. And then it's, well, good luck in if you ever get that done so that you can actually drive some sort of business value and outcome. But I think lots of organizations, I think as they continue along that maturity, are trying to be this collaborative, how do we bring the business on board? How do we bring security along? How do we bring IT? How do we make sure that they're all connected, driving that common business value outcome? And then really focusing, I think, on what is the data that we have that we need to solve for that problem, and how do we get it into the ecosystem? So I think it's going to take organizations realizing that it's a maturity journey, and how do they take steps to get there?
I echo that. You need to know your data to know what to do with it, right? I've been in few customer engagements where one of my customers, they want to go and mask every single column they have, right? That's it. So they think if they do that, they will satisfy the privacy people and their compliance team, right? You cannot just apply, nuclear protection for everything. You classify, then you apply the adequate protection for that. And the most important part of this is the auditing and monitoring. And this is where actually I was listening to you when you were, I was, writing stuff because I have a short memory, so I have to put stuff here. But I was listening to what you're saying about auditing. Right? And this is a very, very good distinction between auditing and monitoring. Auditing is after fact. Actively monitoring systems, this is where actually you know what's going on. And even after you classify your data, you apply all your protection, you cannot just go and be perfect from day one. That's a life cycle. You apply, you actively monitor, and then you discover the gaps, you re-enter the cycle again. And that's something has to happen all the time. And the systems, like for example, the dashboard you're building, where basically you can see who, when, and actually there is one key factor as well. That's what I see across a lot of customers in EMEA, the where question. If you allow access to a specific system, you need to make sure you have geo protection against your data, right? Geofencing is growing, and it will continue to grow. And your auditing and monitoring system actually should integrate those geolocation data within the landscape. But here is the thing. Privacy and security a lot of time is mixed up. Actually, they don't go along too much sometimes, right? Because, from security perspective, I want to see everything about you. I want to see your behavior, right? Privacy people, that's a no. Yeah? You cannot just put those highly sensitive information in our systems. We cannot just continue monitoring the behavior. Now, this is the work, and I'm not saying that's going to be easy on you or anyone else. I've been there as well. Finding the right balance between those two. How much data you need to actually be able to actively monitoring your data and to be to detect that specific breach within a reasonable time period.
Yeah. It's interesting to see the evolving role of AI and machine learning in this space.
Yeah.
We've already worked with clients that are proactively remediating data. Now, just a gentle reminder that data protection doesn't necessarily mean more data. Sometimes it means less data, data minimization, data deletion, data archival, and proactively taking a data set, putting it in cold storage, encrypting it, and then deleting it after a number of years. So it really deeply resonates when you talk a little bit about proactive, but not auditing, monitoring, but how about proactive action, and how about prescripting trends and being able to actually predict where your organization is heading using smart sensors data and behavioral metadata. You mentioned earlier about behavioral metadata. Super important, and I think that's the evolution of the art of the possible. Nobody's going to get there unless we do the foundational components we talked about earlier. So yeah.
So it's not only about protecting the data you have, but proactively trying to have less data? Is that?
Yeah. And if you have no legitimate interest for it, the regulator will take a stance that you are in breach of regulation for not deleting it within time and not demonstrating legitimate interest, and saying we need it for operational purposes is not good enough nowadays. The regulators are starting to be tougher and dig deeper. So I sense a world where data minimization, data deletion becomes probably the next hot topic. And you won't be able to achieve that unless you catalog, unless you append the controls, the restrictions, you have the processes, you have the auditing, the monitoring, the collaboration.
Yeah, which creates another conflict, right, between the data organization and whoever tries to minimize, because as a data organization, you usually try to hold on to the data, because what if you need it in the future? What if you want to train a model and then go back very, very far, right? So how do you resolve those conflicts? You talked about what if you mask or encrypt everything, right? Like, of course, that's like more protection, right? But there's this conflict between utility and getting value out of the data and security. So how do you bridge that gap?
So there is, you do not need to work, actually, if you want to train your model, you don't need to work on the actual data, right? You can have a synthetic data set that you can actually train your model there. You can make your model very, very accurate to a certain extent without actually going and start playing with real radioactive style of data, right? And so first of all, like, you need to have, you will have sensitive information anyways. You need to have a proper protection over there. You need to apply artificial intelligence, or like you need to have a training models to scale. Otherwise, you won't be able to scale. And you know, probably like in Immuta, for example, I would say it's a massive data feed to the security operations center, right? And this is like a landscape we see separation between customers, right? Like they have their firewall logs, proxy logs, all those logs. And then identity and access management system or access control systems like Immuta, for example, their log stays there. Customers, you should go and integrate this data feed within your organization. And that's very important because you need to know, I believe a lot of you are familiar with defense in depth, right? It's like an onion. You need to protect your endpoint system, like your data sources, and then you need to protect the end system that consumes the data. Those are you need to make sure no garbage in, right? And you need to make sure no unauthorized access or unneeded access is there to your data. Once you have those feeds or logs from those two systems, now you go to the core where the data is being processed in those data cloud platform. And this is where, for example, logs from Immuta, for example, should go to the security operations center. If you bring that in, you will have full visibility from A to Z, and that will help you to increase or decrease the detection time to a really good period of time. And I would love to see that in action, by the way.
Nice.
And compare it with the last research from IBM.
Yeah, getting a feature request on stage. I think we are getting close to the end. Before we open it up, maybe to one or two questions from the audience. If there's like one recommendation that you would make for, like, I guess this year, next 12 months, what should companies work on? Is it new technology, better classification? Is it culture, people? Like, what's your #1 advice if you have to?
Do we have to choose?
Yeah, you have to do all, right? But that is like, I think, part of the problem, right? It's such an overwhelming topic. Where do you start? Everybody always says it's people, process, technology, culture, but like, where do you start?
I personally don't see it as overwhelming. If you take the big picture and you decompose it and you run a number of parallel work streams and you resource them, empower them, and manage them as integrated asset in an agile way, you can get there together across culture, training, technology, implementation, integration, data cataloging, critical assessment. You can do it all, but what's the appetite? What's the envelope? Do you have the funding, the finance? What is your risk strategy? You know, and risk appetite at board level, that dictates the envelope that you have to play with in the data space, both in kind of defensive capability as well as in offensive. So, yeah.
I would add a word used earlier, which is collaboration between IT, silos, security, business. Everybody's got to be singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of what data they're talking about.
It's interesting.
I guess I would add viciously prioritize, right? If you don't have this unlimited resources, make sure that you're prioritizing those business outcomes, or pieces of the organization where you have the support and you can make some traction. So as opposed to being limited because you can't solve all of it today, make sure that you're prioritizing where you can invest, particularly in the economy.
And partner wisely. Like, partner wisely. You can't do it all on your own. There's other technologists and data people and consultancies, and the world is big, and help is out there, and choose where you want to spend your money and partner wisely. Seek that depth of expertise, the knowledge to accelerate your journey, rather than having to design it in-house with limited availability of resource.
I have two things. Know your data. That's the first thing. And break the silos between the technology and people. Short and sweet.
Yes, and so easy to do.
Yeah.
All right.